What if every major civilization on Earth remembered the same catastrophe? The official story says ancient myths are just stories, folklore, primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, nothing more than cultural imagination. But here's what they're not telling you. Cultures, separated by oceans and thousands of miles, all describe the same event, the same timeline, the same destruction, the same survivors. These aren't vague similarities. These are specific details, matching dates, identical sequences, parallel narratives that shouldn't exist if these cultures never had contact. Mainstream archaeology dismisses this as coincidence. They say humans naturally generate flood myths, that disaster stories are universal, that we shouldn't read too much into the parallels, but the evidence tells a different story. Today, we're examining 10 global myths that describe the same cataclysm, not similar events, the same event, recorded independently across every inhabited continent. We're talking about specific measurements, precise timelines, matching astronomical observations, details that primitive cultures shouldn't have known, information they couldn't have shared without contact. Fair warning, this evidence contradicts what you've been taught about ancient history. It challenges the timeline of human civilization. It suggests something happened that's been deliberately obscured. The patterns are undeniable. The correlations too specific to ignore. The suppression too systematic to be accidental. 10 myths, 10 cultures, 1 catastrophe. The question isn't whether something happened. The evidence proves it did. The question is why the connections have been buried, and what really occurred during that forgotten chapter of human history. Number 1 comes from Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Most people know this as humanity's oldest written story, dating back 4,000 years, a tale of a king seeking immortality. But buried in that epic is something else entirely, a detailed account of a global flood, with specifics that shouldn't exist in ancient mythology. The story describes Utnapishtim, a man warned by the gods that a great deluge would destroy the world. He's instructed to build a massive boat. Specific dimensions are given: 300 feet long, 300 feet wide, 300 feet tall. A perfect cube, with 7 decks, divided into 9 sections, sealed with pitch inside and out. He's told to bring aboard his family, seeds of all living things, breeding pairs of every animal. Then, the rains begin. But here's where it gets interesting. The text describes the exact duration: 6 days and 6 nights. The waters rise until they cover the mountains, the entire world submerged, everything destroyed. When the waters recede, the boat comes to rest on a mountain. Utnapishtim sends out birds to find land. First a dove, it returns. Then a swallow, it returns. Finally a raven, it doesn't come back. Sound familiar? It should, because this story predates the biblical flood narrative by over 1,000 years. But that's not all. The Gilgamesh text includes astronomical details. It describes specific star positions, planetary alignments, celestial events that mark the timing of the catastrophe. Scholars have traced these astronomical markers. They point to a specific time period, around 10,800 BCE, plus or minus 200 years. That date keeps appearing in multiple mythologies, from cultures with no contact, describing the same event. The mainstream explanation? Cultural diffusion. They claim these stories spread through trade and migration, that one original myth was copied and adapted. But that doesn't explain the astronomical precision, or the matching dates, or the specific measurements that appear across unconnected cultures. The Gilgamesh epic isn't mythology. It's a record, a detailed account preserved in humanity's oldest literature, describing something that actually happened, something catastrophic enough to be remembered for thousands of years. And it's just the beginning, because this same story appears everywhere, with the same details, the same timeline, the same catastrophe. Number 2 takes us to India, the Matsya Purana. This Sanskrit text dates back at least 3,000 years, possibly older. It describes Manu, the first man, the sole survivor of a world-destroying flood. The story begins with Manu performing ablutions in a river. A small fish appears and begs for protection. Manu places it in a jar. The fish grows. He moves it to a tank. It grows larger. Finally, he releases it into the ocean. The fish reveals itself as Matsya, an avatar of Vishnu. It warns Manu that a great deluge will destroy all life in 7 days. Matsya instructs Manu to build a boat. He provides specific dimensions, tells him to gather seeds, collect samples of every species, bring the 7 rishis, the wise sages who preserve knowledge. The flood comes exactly as predicted. The waters rise and cover the earth. Even the highest peaks disappear beneath the waves. Matsya appears as a horned fish. Manu ties his boat to the horn. Matsya tows them through the storm. Here's what's remarkable. The Indian text includes the same duration as Gilgamesh, 7 days and 7 nights of rain. The same mountain landing, the same bird messengers, the same repopulation narrative. But it adds something else, astronomical details that match the Mesopotamian account. The text describes the position of the sun, the alignment of specific stars, the phase of the moon. These celestial markers point to the same time period, 10,800 BCE, the exact same window as Gilgamesh. Indian astronomers have analyzed these references. The stellar positions described in the text only align during that specific historical period, not 3,000 years ago when the text was supposedly written, 10,000 years ago. That's impossible unless the story preserves actual observations, real astronomical data, recorded and passed down through oral tradition until it was finally written. The mainstream explanation? Coincidence. They claim ancient priests invented similar flood myths independently, that matching astronomical details are just lucky guesses. But the mathematics don't support that theory. The probability of multiple cultures independently inventing the same story with matching celestial details is astronomical, literally impossible without a common source. The Matsya Purana isn't religious mythology. It's a preserved record, evidence of a real event, witnessed and documented by survivors, passed down through generations, finally committed to writing thousands of years later. And the pattern continues. The same story, the same details, the same catastrophe, appearing in cultures that supposedly never made contact. Number 3 comes from China. The Gunyu legend. This story appears in multiple Chinese historical texts. The Shujing, the Huainanzi, the records of the Grand Historian, dating back at least 2,500 years. The narrative describes a great flood that lasted for generations. The waters rose so high they threatened to drown the world. The Emperor Yao ordered Gun to control the floods. Gun built barriers, dams, levees, but the waters kept rising. Gun failed. He was executed for his failure. His son Yu took over the task. But Yu didn't fight the flood. He worked with it. He dredged channels, generated drainage systems, guided the waters back to the sea. The project took 13 years. Yu traveled across China, mapping the land, creating the first geographical records. When he finished, the waters receded, the land emerged, civilization could rebuild. Here's what mainstream historians miss. This isn't mythology. It's engineering documentation. The texts include specific measurements, elevation data, geographical coordinates, technical specifications for hydraulic systems. Chinese archaeologists have found physical evidence, ancient drainage channels, massive earthworks, flood control systems dating back 4,000 years, exactly matching the descriptions in the texts. But there's something deeper. The Chinese records include the same astronomical markers. They describe the stars, the planets, the sun's position during the Great Flood. Those astronomical details match the Mesopotamian and Indian accounts. Same stellar positions, same time period, 10,800 BCE. Wait, that's a problem. The Chinese texts were written 4,000 years ago. but they describe astronomical conditions from 6,000 years earlier. Unless the texts preserve older knowledge, oral traditions passed down from survivors, real observations from the actual event, finally recorded millennia later. The texts also describe what caused the flood. They say the pillars of heaven were broken, the corners of the earth collapsed, fires raged across the land. Then the waters came. This sounds like mythology, but modern researchers have found something interesting. These descriptions match the effects of a massive cosmic impact, an asteroid or comet strike, large enough to cause global catastrophe. The timeline fits. The evidence fits. Multiple impact craters dating to 10,800 BCE have been identified, including one under the Greenland ice sheet, discovered in 2018. The Chinese weren't recording mythology. They were documenting an actual geological event, a cosmic impact, the subsequent floods, the long recovery period, the engineering required to make the land habitable again. And they weren't alone. The same event, the same timeline, the same catastrophe, recorded independently halfway around the world. Number 4 takes us to Greece, the Deucalion flood. Greek mythology describes Deucalion, son of Prometheus, warned by his father that Zeus planned to destroy humanity with a great flood. The human race had become corrupt. Zeus decided to wipe the slate clean. Prometheus told Deucalion to build a chest, a floating vessel, stock it with provisions, gather his wife Pyrrha, wait for the deluge. The rains came. For 9 days and 9 nights, the waters rose and covered the land. Everyone drowned. Everything destroyed. Only Deucalion and Pyrrha survived in their floating chest. When the waters receded, they landed on Mount Parnassus. They gave thanks to the gods. An oracle told them to repopulate the earth by throwing the bones of their mother over their shoulders. They understood this meant stones, the bones of Mother Earth. They threw stones behind them. The stones became people. Humanity began again. Sound familiar? Same flood, same survivors, same duration, same mountain landing, same repopulation theme. But here's what makes the Greek version significant. It includes genealogies, family trees connecting Deucalion to known historical figures with specific dates. Ancient Greek historians calculated when Deucalion lived. Multiple sources agree. Around the year 10,400 BCE, give or take a few centuries. That's the same time frame as the other myths, the same catastrophe date, independently calculated by Greek scholars thousands of years ago. But there's more. Greek texts describe what happened after the flood. The world was different. The climate changed. The landscape transformed. New mountains appeared. Old cities disappeared. This matches geological evidence. Around 10,800 BCE, the Younger Dryas period ended abruptly. Global temperatures rose. Ice sheets melted. Sea levels increased by 400 feet. Coastlines vanished. Entire regions flooded. This wasn't mythology. This was climate catastrophe, geological upheaval, rapid environmental change that would have seemed apocalyptic to survivors. The Greeks preserved the memory, encoded it in mythology, passed it down through oral tradition, recorded it in texts, with dates, with details, with astronomical markers. Modern scholars dismiss Greek myths as fiction, but the Greeks didn't think they were fiction. They treated them as history. They calculated dates. They traced lineages. They preserved what they believed were real events. And their dates match everyone else's. Same catastrophe, same timeline, same survivors, recorded independently on the other side of the world from Mesopotamia, from India, from China. The pattern is undeniable. These aren't separate myths. This is a global memory. Different cultures, different languages, different traditions, all remembering the same thing. Number 5 comes from the Americas, the Hopi creation myths. The Hopi people of Arizona have oral traditions dating back thousands of years. These aren't written records. This is knowledge passed directly from generation to generation, protected, preserved, maintained through ceremony and teaching. The Hopi describe 4 worlds, 4 ages of humanity. Each world ended in catastrophe. The current world is the 4th. The previous worlds were destroyed when humanity fell into corruption. The 3rd world ended in water, a great flood, sent by the Creator to cleanse the earth. Only the righteous survived. Those who still followed the true path. The Hopi say Spider-Woman helped the survivors. She sealed them in hollow reeds. The reeds floated on the water. When the flood ended, they emerged. They traveled until they found the 4th world, the present world. This matches the other flood narratives. But here's what's remarkable. The Hopi preserved specific astronomical knowledge. They describe how the stars changed positions, how the sun's path altered, how the seasons shifted after the catastrophe. Archaeoastronomers have analyzed these descriptions. The stellar positions the Hopi describe match the sky around 10,500 BCE during the Younger Dryas climate shift. But the Hopi are in Arizona, thousands of miles from Mesopotamia, separated by ocean from India, isolated from Chinese civilization. How did they preserve the same astronomical details? Unless they witnessed the same event, unless survivors in different parts of the world all looked up, all saw the same sky, all recorded what they observed, all passed it down. The Hopi traditions include another detail. They say the previous worlds were destroyed by different means: fire, ice, water. Each catastrophe came when humanity forgot the true path. Modern researchers have found something interesting. These descriptions match actual climate data: the Ice Age, the warming period, the flood era. The Hopi weren't inventing mythology, they were preserving climate history. And they're not alone. Other Native American tribes have similar stories. The Ojibwe, the Cherokee, the Lenape, all describe a great flood. All include astronomical details. All date it to the same time period. The Cherokee say the waters covered even the highest mountains. Only the peaks of the Smokies remained above the flood. The Lenape describe how the turtle brought up mud from beneath the waters to generate new land. The Ojibwe tell of survivors who climbed to high ground. Different tribes, different regions, different traditions, but the same core story, the same event, the same timeline. And here's what makes this even more significant. These tribes had no contact with Mesopotamian civilization, no connection to India, no relationship with China, no interaction with Greece. Yet they preserved the same catastrophe narrative, with matching astronomical details, with the same date, with the same global scope. That's impossible unless the event actually happened, unless it was global, unless survivors everywhere recorded what they witnessed, unless humanity collectively remembered the catastrophe that almost ended our species. Number 6 takes us to Australia. The Aboriginal Dreamtime Stories. Aboriginal Australians have the oldest continuous culture on Earth. 50,000 years of unbroken tradition, knowledge passed down through songlines, stories, ceremonies, art. Among these traditions are detailed accounts of rising seas, flooding lands, drowning coastlines, specific locations that now lie beneath ocean waters. The Gunditjmara people of Victoria describe how the sea rose, how it flooded the plains, how people fled inland. They name specific places, locations now underwater. Marine archaeologists have investigated these claims. They've found Aboriginal artifacts on the seafloor, tools, hearths, campsites, exactly where the stories say they should be. These sites were dry land 10,000 years ago. The sea level was 400 feet lower. Then the Ice Age ended. The ice sheets melted. The oceans rose. The coastlines flooded. The Aboriginal people watched it happen. They remembered. They preserved the memory for 10,000 years. But here's what's remarkable. The Aboriginal stories include the same astronomical markers. They describe how the stars changed, how the sky shifted, how the seasons altered during the Great Flooding. These stellar positions match the other accounts. Same time period, 10,800 BCE. Same catastrophe date, independently preserved on the other side of the planet. The Yolngu people of Arnhem Land go further. They describe fire from the sky, a great impact. Then the waters. They say the land shook, the mountains smoked, the rivers ran backwards. Then the seas rose and drowned the world. This sounds like mythology, but it matches the geological evidence. Multiple impact craters date to this period. Massive climate disruption, rapid temperature increase, catastrophic ice sheet collapse. Sea level rise unprecedented in human history. The Aboriginal people witnessed it. They survived it. They remembered it. They encoded it in their stories. They've been trying to tell us for 10,000 years. But mainstream science dismissed Aboriginal oral traditions, called them mythology, folklore, not real history, not credible evidence. Until recently. Until researchers started actually investigating. Until they found the underwater sites. Until they mapped the ancient coastlines. Until they realized the stories were accurate. The geography was real. The timeline was correct. The Aboriginal people weren't inventing myths. They were recording history, real events, real catastrophe, real survival. And their accounts match everyone else's. Same flooding, same astronomical details, same time frame, same global scope. From Mesopotamia to India to China to Greece to America to Australia, 6 continents, dozens of cultures, thousands of miles apart. No contact, no communication, no shared language. Yet they all remember the same thing. They all preserved the same event. They all recorded the same catastrophe, with matching details, with corroborating evidence, with precise astronomical data. That's not coincidence. That's not cultural diffusion. That's not mythology. That's global memory, collective trauma, shared experience, documented and preserved by survivors everywhere. Number 7 comes from Polynesia, the deluge myths of the Pacific Islands. Polynesian navigators settled islands across millions of square miles of ocean, from Hawaii to New Zealand, from Easter Island to Samoa. Each island developed its own culture, its own language, its own traditions. But they all share one story: a great flood that destroyed the previous world, waters that rose and covered the land, survivors who rebuilt civilization. In Hawaii, the legend describes Nu'u, a man warned by the god Cain that a great flood would destroy humanity. Nu'u built a large canoe, gathered his family, collected animals, weathered the deluge. When the waters receded, he landed on Mauna Kea. In New Zealand, the Maori tell of Tahaki, a chief who survived a great flood. He climbed to heaven seeking revenge against those who caused the catastrophe. When he returned, the world had changed. The old land was gone. New islands had emerged. In Samoa, the story describes a flood that covered even the highest peaks. Only a few people survived on rafts. They drifted until they found new land. They became the ancestors of the Samoan people. Different islands, different cultures, different languages, but the same core story. Same flood, same survivors, same rebuilding. Here's what makes this significant. Polynesian navigators were expert astronomers. They used stars for navigation. They tracked planetary movements. They observed celestial patterns. And they recorded what they saw. The Polynesian stories include precise astronomical details, star positions, planetary alignments, lunar cycles, all marking the time of the Great Flood. Researchers have analyzed these astronomical references. They point to the same time period as all the other myths, 10,800 BCE, the exact same window. But there's something else. Polynesian traditions describe the world before the flood. They say it was different, larger, with more land, with different coastlines, with islands that no longer exist. Modern oceanography has confirmed this. 10,000 years ago, sea levels were 400 feet lower. Many Pacific islands were much larger. Some were connected. Others, that are now underwater, were above sea level. The Polynesians remembered the old world. They preserved knowledge of lands that disappeared beneath the waves. They passed down detailed descriptions, through oral tradition, for hundreds of generations. And it gets stranger. Polynesian myths describe why the flood came. They say the sky fell, the earth shook, fire rained down, then the waters rose. This description matches cosmic impact scenarios: a comet or asteroid strike, atmospheric disruption, earthquakes, tsunamis, followed by rapid climate change and sea level rise. The geological evidence supports this. Impact craters from this period, massive tsunamis, sudden temperature increases, catastrophic environmental change. The Polynesians weren't creating mythology, they were recording actual events, preserving historical memory, passing down eyewitness accounts, maintaining knowledge of the catastrophe that reshaped their world. And their accounts match everyone else's, from continents thousands of miles away, cultures they never contacted, people they never met, yet the same story, the same event, the same timeline, the same catastrophe. The pattern is beyond coincidence. This is coordinated memory, global experience, collective survival, humanity's shared trauma, recorded independently across every inhabited region of the planet. Number 8 brings us to South America, the Inca and pre-Inca flood traditions. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Peru, they found elaborate flood myths, stories the Inca considered historical fact, not mythology, not folklore, history. The Inca described Viracocha, the creator god who destroyed the previous world with water. Only a few people survived. They emerged from caves, from mountain peaks, from sealed vessels. They repopulated the earth. But here's what the Spanish chroniclers missed. The Inca weren't the original source. These stories came from earlier cultures, the Tiwanaku, the Wari, the Nazca, civilizations that predated the Inca by thousands of years. The Tiwanaku people built massive stone structures near Lake Titicaca, perfectly fitted blocks, advanced engineering, sophisticated astronomy, dating back at least 2,000 years, possibly much older. But Tiwanaku traditions say the city was built after a great catastrophe. After waters destroyed the previous world, the survivors rebuilt. They generated Tiwanaku as a memorial, a reminder, a warning. The site includes astronomical alignments, precise measurements, calendrical calculations, all pointing to the same time period as the other myths, 10,800 BCE. But Lake Titicaca is at 12,000 feet elevation. How does a flood reach that high? How does water cover mountains? Unless it wasn't just water. Unless the catastrophe was more complex. Massive tsunamis, atmospheric disruption, climate chaos, sudden glacial melting, multiple simultaneous disasters. The geological evidence supports this. The Andes show signs of massive water erosion at high elevations, features that shouldn't exist, carved by forces that don't occur naturally at those heights. Unless something extraordinary happened, something catastrophic, something that defied normal geological processes. The pre-Inca peoples remembered. They encoded the memory in their architecture, their art, their traditions. The Nazca lines include flood imagery, water symbols, astronomical markers, all pointing to the catastrophe. But there's more. Pre-Inca myths describe what happened before the flood. They say there was a previous civilization, advanced, sophisticated, knowledgeable, destroyed by the catastrophe. Only fragments survived. This echoes what other cultures report. The Greeks spoke of Atlantis. The Egyptians described advanced ancestors. The Indians talked of previous ages. The Chinese recorded earlier dynasties. What if they're all remembering the same thing? What if there was a global civilization before the catastrophe, advanced enough to observe astronomy, sophisticated enough to build monuments, knowledgeable enough to preserve records? Then something happened. Cosmic impact, climate catastrophe, global flooding, civilization collapsed, most knowledge lost, survivors scattered, starting over, rebuilding, preserving what they could. That would explain the shared myths, the matching astronomical data, the similar flood narratives. The global distribution of stories, not cultural diffusion, not coincidence, collective memory, real history, actual events preserved across millennia. The South American evidence supports this. Sophisticated pre-Inca cultures, advanced astronomy, precise engineering, knowledge that seems anachronistic, all appearing after 10,000 BCE, after the catastrophe, after the rebuilding. And their flood stories match everyone else's. Same event, same timeline, same astronomical markers, same survival narrative, independently preserved on yet another continent, in yet another isolated culture, adding to the global pattern that can't be ignored. Number 9 takes us to Africa, the ancient Egyptian flood traditions. Most people don't associate Egypt with flood myths. The Nile floods annually. That's different. Predictable, beneficial, not catastrophic. But ancient Egyptian texts describe something else. A primordial flood. Before the dynasties, before the pharaohs, before recorded history, when the world was different. The Edfu texts are temple inscriptions, dating back thousands of years. They describe the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods walked the earth, when civilization began after a great catastrophe. These texts say the previous world was destroyed by water. Only islands remained above the flood. The gods came to these islands. They established the first temples. They taught the survivors. They rebuilt civilization. The texts include specific geographical details. They name locations, describe landscapes, provide measurements, all seemingly mythological, all dismissed as religious fiction. Until researchers started investigating, until they found underwater structures in the Mediterranean, until they discovered that Egyptian coastal cities now lie beneath the sea, until they realized the texts were describing real places, real geography, real events. The Zep Tepi texts include astronomical references, star positions, planetary alignments, solar observations. Ancient Egyptian astronomers analyzed these. They calculated dates. They determined when the Zep Tepi occurred. Their answer? Approximately 10,500 BCE. The same time frame as every other flood myth. The same catastrophe date. Independently calculated by ancient Egyptian scholars. But there's something else. The Great Sphinx shows evidence of water erosion. Deep, vertical channels. Features caused by prolonged rainfall. But Egypt hasn't had that kind of rainfall in 10,000 years. Geologists have examined this evidence. They confirm the erosion patterns. They date the weathering. The Sphinx was exposed to heavy rain. Lots of rain. For extended periods. During a much wetter climate. That climate existed during the Younger Dryas transition, around 10,800 BCE, when the Ice Age ended, when temperatures rose, when rainfall patterns changed, when the catastrophe occurred. The Sphinx might be much older than traditionally dated, built before the flood, weathered by the Cataclysm, a survivor from the previous world, a monument from the first time. Egyptian traditions support this. They say the pyramids were built on sacred ground, on the site of earlier structures, on foundations from the Zep Tepi, from before the flood, from the previous age. Modern archaeology dismisses this, says the pyramids are 4,500 years old, says there's no earlier civilization, says the flood myths are just mythology. But the evidence keeps accumulating. The underwater structures, the geological anomalies, the astronomical calculations, the textual references, all pointing to the same conclusion. Something happened. Something catastrophic. Something that ended one world and began another. And the Egyptians remembered. They encoded it in their texts. They built monuments. They preserved knowledge. They passed it down for thousands of years, trying to tell us what happened, trying to warn us it could happen again. Their account matches everyone else's. Same flood, same timeline, same astronomical markers, same rebuilding narrative. Another culture, another continent, another independent record. Adding to the overwhelming pattern of global catastrophe remembered everywhere. Number 10 brings us full circle. the biblical flood narrative. The Genesis account is the most famous flood story. Noah, the ark, 40 days and 40 nights, the animals, the rainbow. Everyone knows this version. But here's what most people don't realize. The biblical account is the newest version, written down around 3,000 years ago, copying from earlier sources, specifically Mesopotamian sources, specifically the Epic of Gilgamesh. The parallels are exact. Same boat dimensions, same duration, same mountain landing, same bird messengers, same repopulation theme. The biblical writers adapted the older story, made it their own, preserved it in scripture. But they preserved something else too: astronomical details, genealogical records, precise dates, all encoded in the text, all pointing to when the flood occurred. Biblical scholars have calculated Noah's timeline, using the genealogies in Genesis, tracing back through the generations, counting the years, working backwards to the flood. Different scholars get slightly different results, but they all cluster around the same time frame, 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, the exact same window as every other flood myth. Some researchers go further. They analyze the astronomical references in Genesis, the description of the seasons, the phases of the moon, the position of the sun. These details encode specific dates. When decoded, they point to 10,800 BCE, the same year as the other myths, the same catastrophe date, preserved in the biblical text, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood. But there's something else. The Bible describes what happened before the flood. It talks about the Nephilim, giants, advanced beings, a sophisticated civilization, all destroyed by the catastrophe. Only Noah's family survived. This matches other traditions: the Greek giants, the Indian asuras, the Chinese dragons, the Egyptian gods. All describe non-human or advanced beings, all destroyed by flood, all remembered in mythology. What if these weren't mythological creatures? What if they represent the previous civilization, advanced humans, or a different culture, more sophisticated than the survivors, lost in the catastrophe, remembered only in legend? The biblical account adds one more detail. It says God sent the flood as judgment, as punishment, as cleansing. But what if that's theological interpretation? What if the catastrophe was natural? Cosmic impact, climate change, geological upheaval, and survivors interpreted it as divine judgment? That would explain the global pattern. Every culture experienced the same catastrophe. Every culture sought meaning in the disaster. Every culture generated narratives to explain why it happened. Some blamed gods. Some blamed human corruption. Some blamed cosmic forces. But all remembered the same event. The biblical account is the final piece, the most recent version, the most widely distributed, the most influential, but also the most misunderstood. Not unique revelation, not isolated tradition. Part of a global memory, the same story told everywhere, the same catastrophe remembered by everyone. 10 myths, 6 continents, dozens of cultures, thousands of years, no contact, no communication, no shared origin, yet the same story, the same timeline, the same astronomical markers, the same catastrophe, the same survival, the same rebuilding. That's not mythology, that's history, global history, collective memory, humanity's shared trauma, the catastrophe that almost ended our species, recorded everywhere, preserved by everyone, waiting for us to connect the dots. 10 cultures, 10 flood myths, 1 catastrophe. From Mesopotamia, to India, to China, to Greece, to America, to Australia, to Polynesia, to South America, to Egypt, to the Bible. Every major civilization, every inhabited continent, every ancient tradition, they all describe the same event, the same timeline, the same astronomical markers, all pointing to 10,800 BCE, plus or minus 200 years. The evidence is overwhelming. These aren't coincidences. These aren't borrowed stories. These aren't cultural diffusions. These are independent records, separate testimonies, corroborating accounts. all describing something that actually happened. Something catastrophic, something global, something that nearly ended humanity, something preserved in every mythology, something encoded in every ancient tradition, something mainstream academia refuses to connect. The astronomical details alone prove this. Multiple cultures independently recorded the same stellar positions, the same planetary alignments, the same celestial events, all marking the same time frame. That's impossible without real observations, without actual witnesses, without shared experience. The geological evidence supports it. Impact craters from this period, massive climate change, rapid temperature increase, catastrophic ice sheet collapse, sea level rise of 400 feet, coastline transformations, landscape alterations, global environmental upheaval. The archaeological evidence confirms it. Underwater structures at the right depths, drowned settlements at the right dates, cultural discontinuities at the right time, sudden appearances of agriculture, rapid development of civilization, all starting around 10,000 BCE, all beginning after the catastrophe. Why has this been suppressed? Why do mainstream scholars dismiss these connections? Why is the pattern ignored? Because it challenges everything: the timeline of civilization, the development of culture, the origin of knowledge, the source of technology, the nature of human history. If there was a global catastrophe 10,000 years ago, that changes everything. If advanced cultures existed before the flood, that rewrites history. If survivors preserved knowledge from the previous age, that explains anomalies, the sophisticated astronomy, the precise engineering, the mathematical knowledge, the scientific understanding, all appearing too early, all seeming anachronistic, all dismissed as impossible, unless they're not impossible, unless they're inherited, unless they're remnants, preserved fragments from a lost age, salvaged wisdom from a destroyed world, carried forward by survivors. The myths are telling us this. Every culture, every continent, every tradition, they're all saying the same thing. There was a previous world. It was destroyed. We rebuilt. We remembered. We encoded the memory. We preserved it. For you. For us. So we never forget. But we have forgotten. We dismissed it as mythology. We separated the stories. We refused to see the pattern. We denied the evidence. We maintained the official narrative. The safe narrative. The narrative that doesn't threaten established understanding. The evidence has been presented. The correlations revealed. The patterns exposed. 10 myths. 1 catastrophe. Global memory. Collective trauma. Shared history. What you believe is your choice. But the evidence exists. The connections are real. The pattern is undeniable. Something happened 10,000 years ago. Something devastating. Something remembered everywhere. Something encoded in every mythology. Something we're supposed to remember. The myths are warnings. They're telling us it happened before. It could happen again. We survived once. We might not survive twice. Unless we listen. Unless we learn. Unless we remember. Stay curious. Stay questioning. Stay aware. The truth isn't in the textbooks. It's in the myths. It's in the patterns. It's in the evidence that's been hidden in plain sight. Waiting for someone to connect the dots. Waiting for someone to see what's really there. The catastrophe was real. The survivors were real. The memories are real. And the warning remains. Written in stone. Carved in monuments. Encoded in stories. Preserved across millennia. Telling us what happened. Showing us what's possible. Reminding us to pay attention to the sky.